Welcome back to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. This is episode number 26. It's Not Supposed to Be This Way with Lysa TerKeurst. Before we get to the interview, I want to say thank you for everybody who tuned in and who shared my interview from last week with Sheila Walsh. I've got some really fantastic feedback from you guys. Seems that Sheila really touched a nerve with many of you in a good way. So if you missed that interview, it actually goes really well back to back with this discussion with Lysa. Sheila's written a book called It's Okay Not to Be Okay, and it's her journey through perfectionism and up to a place of peace and contentment with where she is at and understanding the journey of life with God. And I don't want to give away too much here from this interview with Lysa, but Lysa's got a book out also called It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, and it is a rich source of encouragement for you. I'm going to share some more thoughts at the end of this interview. I normally don't do that, but Lysa and I did not have a lot of time, and I was also really moved by a number of things from this discussion. So if you want some further thoughts from me, tune back in at the very end after the interview, and I'll just share a few more thoughts. Anyway, here we go. Okay, welcome back everybody to the podcast. I've got Lysa TerKeurst on the show. For those 5 or 6 of you out there who don't know who she is, she's a best-selling author, conference speaker, Bible teacher. She's the president of Proverbs 31 Ministries, and I'm really excited to talk to you, Lysa. Thanks for being on the show today.
Well, thank you. It's an honor for me to be with you.
So your new book is called It's Not Supposed to Be This Way. And so the book, there's a lot of vulnerability, and so I'm going to be vulnerable. When I got sent a copy of the book in the mail, I was like, oh yeah, another nice-looking Lysa TerKeurst book. I might not read it. And then partly that's because I used to run a Christian bookstore. And so we saw your books come and go, and predominantly female audience, and I was kind of like, great. I love that other people are reading these books. Cool. But then I was thinking over the weekend, and I was like, you know what? I think Lysa went through some stuff. I haven't followed you closely, but I was like, I think I remember reading something, and so this would maybe actually be very interesting. So I picked it up again, and It's Not Supposed to Be This Way, finding unexpected strength when disappointments leave you shattered. And now I was like, oh, hold on. Maybe I will give this one a more thorough look. And then I get an email from the publicist, and he's like, hey, man, I know this might not be your normal fare, but trust me, you want to take a look at this one. So, I'm halfway through, and every chapter I put down and I cry, and I say, God, I love you, and I don't understand, but you're good. So Thank you for starting this vulnerable journey with us.
You're so welcome. And thank you for your vulnerability and just sharing your own journey, because I think a lot of times people will approach a book. Books are so accessible to us today. And I think, we approach it and it's like, another book, another Christian message, but I do pray this one's different for people.
Yeah, well, I have been telling everybody that they need to read it. So, let's dig right in. For folks who maybe aren't in the loop, Lysa has put out a bunch of books. I would say, and maybe you could please correct me if you don't feel this is a fair assumption, but I would say the journey of your last, say, 3 books seem to be getting consistently more vulnerable and deeper into unpacking our pain. I think, a book like your devotional work and your best yes, it's kind of like, okay, great, this is helpful. This helps us live an abundant, rich life and helps us choose our priorities and so on and so forth, right? But as we get into uninvited, my pastor, Amy, she's been reading through that book slowly, because every chapter she's got to unpack years of her life. And she feels like you're telling her story through that book. And then with this book, you're talking about your marriage and breast cancer and real gut-wrenching, agonizing events of life that so many of us would rather not really sit with. So this is real stuff. How did, I mean, beyond obviously the traumas and the events that took place, how did this begin as a work, and what pushed you to step out with this one?
Well, first of all, I think you can tell just from even the recap of circumstances that I've been through. All of these things caught me by surprise. So it was not like I had years to prepare for this message or even years to think about, would I write a book like this? I had no idea, that the circumstances that happened to me were going to unfold the way they did and what their realities were. So this really is not a book I ever wanted to write because it's not a message I ever wanted to live. And, coming on the heels of my book, Uninvited, I wanted to write a different message for the next one. I didn't want to go to the deep, vulnerable places that I'd gone to in Uninvited. I was kind of tired of that, So, but God had such a different plan. And I write what I experience. And I've discovered that the richest writing for people comes not when we share the most profound lessons we've learned, but when we expose the pain that we felt with the lessons that we learned. Because people don't believe what you're saying works unless they know that you felt the depth of what they feel. It's so easy for a reader to go, well, that's great, Lysa, in the perfection of your own life, in your little laboratory, that might work, but that's a message that preaches well but doesn't live well in my life. I don't think anybody reading through It's Not Supposed to Be This Way could ever possibly say, well, Lysa doesn't know what it feels like to be me. Even if my circumstances are different, I think the depth of pain that I was walking through and that I spill out onto the pages of this book, I think people will go, man, I think I need to lean in because she knows what it feels like to really, really hurt. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would, as one reader say, yeah, absolutely. You write in the first chapter, which is a beautiful introduction of Between Two Gardens, helping us understand kind of that middle ground that we live in. You wrote, I have honest feelings where I want to throw my hands up in utter frustration and yell about the unfairness of it all. To deny my feelings any voice is to rob me of being human. And I think that portion speaks, to that and to this huge movement we have of being true and acknowledging what's going on and moving away from some kind of false faith, where we don't acknowledge anything bad. But then you continue and you say, but to let my feelings be the only voice will rob my soul of healing perspectives with which God wants to comfort me and carry me forward. My feelings and my faith will almost certainly come into conflict with each other. That's fascinating to me. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I am very, very human, and I have been very human through this journey. My husband and I separated, and we have not lived in the same house for 2 years. It was in a season where also our kids, the last of our 5 kids, grew up and left the house. So I went from living in a very busy household of 7 people, 5 kids, me, my husband, to all of a sudden being utterly alone. That's hard enough when a mom sees the last of her kids leave the house and she still has her husband there. But to have the compounded effects of no one now living in the house with you, a house full of memories of better times and beautiful reminders of the family that we built together. It was almost more than my heart could take. And there were so many nights where I would literally fall asleep crying and then wake up at 2 a.m. and sit straight up in bed trying to get my bearings to figure out what was real about my life. and forgetting that my husband wasn't there, reaching over, expecting to at least get some comfort by this person who's been by my side my entire adult life. And that shock all over again of remembering he's not here and why he's not here. I can't, honestly, I can't even express the depth of emotion I would feel in those minutes. So I don't want people to think, well, then I jumped out of bed and I stood in the middle of my floor reading my Bible and preached a message to myself. That's not the way it happened. I laid there and I wept and wept and wept. And sometimes the only words I could get out, and this was like the best fate I could express in that moment, was, I don't like this and I don't understand this, but Jesus, I'm choosing to love you because I know you love me. It's just really hard to understand how this too can be an expression of your love.
Seriously. There's a woman in our church who lost a son in a drowning incident. And she said to me, we stand here in church and we sing, God, you're never going to let me down. And she's like, I do feel let down though.
Mm-hmm.
And we live at this intersection, right, between this cosmic truth that God doesn't let us down. But in the intersecting space, we may really, really feel like he's let us down.
Absolutely. And I think for me, what I'm coming to realize is, especially with statements like that, like, God will never let me down. Well, you can't tell that to that mom whose son has drowned. You couldn't say that to me at 2 a.m. when I'm having a panic attack, walking around my house, feeling like I can't even catch my breath. I don't understand. I'm so disillusioned. Like you're shaken to your very core. And so the reality is, like, to say to someone like, God's not going to let you down, you have to understand that's in the context of an entire life. It's not in the specific circumstances. And that's where it's so complicated. The best way I can describe it is one of the verses that I have such a up and down relationship with, I guess you could say, is James 1 verses 2-4. Consider it pure joy when you go through trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance, and perseverance must finish its work so that you can be mature, complete, not lacking anything. So when I read that verse and I think about that mom who's standing at the funeral of her son that she lost to the drowning, or me at the 2 a.m. hour walking around my house disillusioned and panicked, it's really hard to hand that person in that moment a card that says, God's never going to let you down, or even a verse like, consider it pure joy, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so the best way I can describe it is that individual circumstance will not equate out to the richest evidence of what we know to be true about God's faithfulness. It's like if we made a cake today and tried to, without mixing all the ingredients together, tried to sit down and enjoy the cake one ingredient at a time. You will never be able to convince me that a cup of flour is awesome. But when that cup of flour is mixed into the context of the full recipe and it's gone through heat and then it rises, then it is the sweetest, most beautiful offering to my taste buds. And so that's kind of the way our life is. It's not consider the individual ingredients of your life, everything pure joy, but consider where the joy might be even in the midst of this, because God's going to take the entirety of the circumstances of our life. He's going to mix them together, and he will, though we have to go through some heat, he will make our life offering sweet and beautiful. It's just going to take time to see that sometimes. Then my soul can stand up and authentically say, after some time has passed, that God is a good, good Father, and God's never going to let me down. It's just in the moment of the intensity of the individual circumstances, that's where we have to stand on the reality that God is good, even in the midst of saying, but this doesn't feel very good.
Yeah. Do you feel like as churches, we're doing very well at creating that space, or do you have thoughts on how we could do better to. I mean, like, I feel like I read Dark Night of the Soul a few years ago, and I'd never read anything like it. And I'd gone through some major issues in my own mental and emotional state, and I was feeling so crushed and destroyed. And it wasn't until I read these, words from this Catholic mystic from the 16th century that I was like, oh, okay, suffering. This may be part of the deal. And I would probably say, next to Dark Night of the Soul, this is one of the best books I've read so far on suffering and on disappointment. Do you feel like we're doing well as a church, or did you feel like you had a theological framework for suffering before you encountered it?
It's a great question. I mean, the church is what God designed for us to find within those relationships. It is where we're supposed to find comfort. It is where we're supposed to find other vulnerable people who can whisper hope from their journey of suffering into ours. And so here's my prayer for this book. I pray that this book and the vulnerability by which I've approached my circumstances, I pray it opens up a new, raw, gritty honesty within the context of church conversations, so that people aren't so afraid to share their journey and the hope that they have in the midst of their own suffering. It's been astounding to me how many people have admitted to me that they've walked through the same thing that I've walked through. But I've known these people for years and years and years in the context of church and ministry, and I never knew that they walked through this. And it wasn't until I opened up my soul and said, let's just have some honest conversations, people. We're all walking through really, really hard things. Your circumstances may be the same as mine or different than mine, but the reality is we'll never understand the depth of each other's hope if we don't know the depth of our hurt. And that's my hope. I pray that we will be able to, with this message, open up even deeper conversations of what people have had before.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. One of the really, I think, insightful things that I found you saying, again, early on in the chapter on dust, which was agonizingly poignant for my life, you write, I was experiencing the death of my normal life, but people don't have funerals for normal. And it's like when we have, my wife and I are doing a training right now for adoption and foster care. And one of the things they teach us is that we need to be loss managers for the children that we care for, and that there are expected losses and unexpected losses. And expected losses are safe to talk about, and society is going to handle them okay. The death of a parent, of an older parent, these are things that we expect through the normal course of life. But unexpected losses are shameful. Like you said, we don't have a funeral for normalcy, but the loss of normalcy is a huge point of grief. That's
right. It is. I remember when there was an activity that my counselor had me do, and it was called an impact letter. And I remember I was so desperate for some kind of marking moment to just say, like, life is never going to be what I thought it was from this point on. And if I can't have a funeral, then I need to have some other kind of marked moment. And so my counselor was helping me understand in writing this impact letter that there were two levels of forgiveness. One is forgiving the person for the facts of what happened. That's easy. And I wouldn't say it's easy, but that's expected. And it's easier to do than forgiving someone for the impact that those facts had on you. I can forgive my husband for having an affair a little easier than I can forgive now the fact that I have panic attacks that I never had before. That's the impact that this has had on me. And so I remember I was having those moments of during this impact letter, and I was writing about how broken things sometimes happen in your life, and you can take the broken pieces, you can glue them back together, and God's light shines through the broken places. But that's not the reality of my life now. This hasn't just broken me. This has shattered me to dust, and you can't glue dust. But as I was writing this impact letter, all of a sudden this turn in my thought happened as I remembered of all the ingredients that God could have chosen in the world. He chose dust to make man from. He had access to everything, and he chose dust to make his favorite creation from that. And so I remember as my pen continued to write this impact letter, there was a turn that happened. And I said, well, you can't glue dust. God can breathe into dust. And from that, anything new can be formed. Dust doesn't have to signify an end. It's often what must be present for the brand new to begin. And I remember it wasn't a funeral. It was just a marked moment where I recognized life will never be the same. However, with God breathing into the dust of my circumstances, he can give me new life, a life that is even, that has its own richness. It's not going to be the same, but it's going to have its own richness that maybe I couldn't have gotten any other way.
And in that richness and that breaking, you can develop, and you do develop, compassion for other people. Yes,
you develop a deep compassion for other people. And here's the really beautiful thing. You even develop a deeper compassion for the one that hurt you, because you recognize they have experienced some kind of deep hurt in their life. And even if I can't have compassion for them, I can have compassion for the hurt that they've surely experienced that led them to this place where they've hurt me. And then forgiveness unfolds in the most unexpected way, and moving on can happen. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Lisa, could I ask you to pray for us? Those of us who are on that journey of disappointment and of feeling like dust, feeling shattered.
Absolutely. Lord, we acknowledge today that you are good. We let that be the starting place from which we process all of the hard things of our life. But we also acknowledge how difficult it is, that we know that you're good. You're a good God who allows hurt, though. And that hurt sometimes can be so disillusioning and so devastating. And so, Lord, I just stand in the midst of someone who's listening today, a friend who maybe I've met and maybe I haven't. But Lord, I pray that through the power of this podcast and your spirit being woven into every word that's been spoken, Lord, I pray that the human angst of that moment of acknowledging that you're good, but that you do allow hurt, Lord, that there can be hope breathed into that situation. There is hope, even if you can't see it, even if you can't touch it today. There is hope in the midst. And Lord, I pray that you would open their eyes to a glimpse, a glimmer of your hope today. And then, Lord, I pray that we will gain a deeper perspective of all of our circumstances, that you are a good God. You are a good God who allows hurt. But then you're also a good God who will take that hurt and use it for eventual good every single time. Help us to hold on so that we can see the full working of your good. For when we experience that, we have a deeper perspective, a richer outlook, and an even more profound sense of who you are to share with other people. Help us to be vulnerable, help us to be honest, and help us to be hope-filled people, shining your light everywhere we go. Amen.
If you're anything like me, maybe you're taking a few deep breaths right now. One of the things I really want to honor Lysa for is choosing to write this book and to conduct these interviews in the middle of her journey. You know, no one can say that writing a work like this or choosing to be vulnerable is easy, because it's not. But it could be, in a sense, easier to write this work, to put these thoughts together after the journey is completed, right? You know what I'm saying? After everything's been restored, after your husband's come back, after your marriage is functioning again, after you're back up on top of the mountain, #blessed, then you can look back and write about how hard it was. But that's not what Lysa's done here, and I really want to commend her for that. If you follow her on social media, you may have seen that just recently, her and her husband, Art, renewed their vows, had a wedding celebration with family and friends, and it would look like there's some really wonderful restoration, in fact, some miracles that have taken place. But that's very recent. And when Lysa and I recorded this interview, that was not the case. And, if you go and read her book, which I really, really recommend you do, you'll see that none of the current state of their relationship was guaranteed. In fact, there was a time earlier in 2018 where she shared online that it looked like the relationship was over. It looked like they would be pursuing divorce. So I think I really want to honor Lysa, especially as a leader within the evangelical world, because we have such a tendency, and I will self-identify as a semi-evangelical, we have such a tendency to value concrete answers, to eradicate doubt, and hold certainty as some kind of idol. And for Lysa to step forward and offer the idea that perhaps we can't be certain about what's going to happen in some of these really painful situations, like our health, or like the health of our parents, or like our marriage, or the faithfulness of a spouse in a relationship, and so on. To step forward and write this book while nothing is certain in her life, to me, goes significantly against the cultural current. And that takes courage, that takes bravery, and I think it takes even a prophetic insight. And so, I really want to honor Lysa for having done this, for stepping out, and even doing interviews surrounding it. If you go and look on some of the interviews online as well, you'll see this is real and raw, and while their marriage does appear to be restored, let's remember that it's not like a binary thing where your marriage is broken and then your marriage is fixed. For Lysa and for Art, as for maybe many of you out there, the ongoing work of making that marriage healthy is exactly that, an ongoing work. My wife and I have walked with couples who have seen their marriages restored. We've also walked with couples whose marriages have not been restored. And Lysa is also one of the first people to say in all of her discourse surrounding this, that no outcome is guaranteed and no outcome should feel like it's substandard. There are people who've gone through certain things and they've felt that divorce is the course of action that they need to pursue. And I am not condemning those people, and Lysa is not condemning those. My parents are divorced, and I know Christian leaders who have thrived in their second marriages, who the Lord has used. So don't take any of this as a value statement on the subject of divorce, simply a value statement on the subject of vulnerability and of being countercultural in the face of certainty. So thank you, Lysa. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see you again soon. You've been listening to the podcast with me, Jonathan Puddle. Thank you for tuning in. The podcast is a weekly show featuring interviews, lots of interviews, with people I find to talk to. What do we talk about? Life, God, things that matter. I'm a children's pastor, a writer, and a business consultant, but my passion is to help people live in a higher level of freedom and to love others at a higher standard of love. So who have I had on the show? I've had famous Bible teachers, leaders of megachurch ministries, local worship leaders, Olympians, DJs, evangelists, community workers, authors, all kinds of folks. Moms and dads, people like you. Head over to jonathanpuddle.com/podcast or podcast, and you'll see all of the past episodes. You can also read my blog, jump on the mailing list. Find me on social media at Jonathan Puddle. See you next week.